All right, let's talk about giants. And I don't mean fairy tale giants like from Jack and the Beanstalk. I also don't mean me being 6'5". I mean giants that people actually claim they found buried right here in the United States. Big skeletons reported in newspapers, dug up from fields, caves, mounds, pretty much everywhere. Now, it's easy to write this off as fantasy, and for some bizarre reason that I truly can't quite figure out, the topic of giants in America is quite the polarizing topic. People on both ends of the spectrum have deeply rooted personal feelings about it. Personally, I don't get that. But when you start really digging into these stories, literally and figuratively, things really get interesting. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Let's begin with Lovelock Cave, Nevada. In 1911, miners discovered a cave filled with ancient artifacts. We've got bones, baskets, and tools. But the Paiute tribe had known about the cave for centuries. They had legends about a tribe called the Seetica, giants with red hair who terrorized the region until the Paiutes trapped the few remaining members of the race of giants inside of the cave and defeated them. They actually defeated them by starting a fire at the mouth of the cave and burning them alive. Now, when the miners actually found red-haired mummified remains in the cave, you could imagine it caused quite a stir. Reports at the time described skeletons between 7 and 8 feet tall. Some even claim the remains were briefly displayed locally before being lost or discarded. Anthropologists claim the remains were normal-sized, but eyewitness accounts, news clippings, and original descriptions linger. So, was this a misunderstanding, fantasy, or something else, like a cover-up? Next, we have Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia. In 1838, amateur archaeologists opened up a huge burial mound and found a bunch of skeletons. Most were ordinary-sized, but eyewitness accounts suggest one set of remains stood almost 8 feet tall. The discovery was even written up in reputable journals at the time. Curiously, the bones disappeared soon after their initial discovery. Articles from the period mention the Smithsonian taking possession of the bones for further study. Now, nearly a century later, the Smithsonian says it has no record of ever receiving them. And speaking of the Smithsonian, let's address the elephant in the room here. The Smithsonian Institution has long been accused, especially by fringe researchers, of covering up evidence of giants. Why is this? Well, some claim it's about protecting established historical narratives. Others say that it's just bureaucratic mismanagement. One historian, Richard Dewhurst, argued that dozens of giant skeleton discoveries were deliberately hidden or destroyed by the Smithsonian in the late 1800s and early 1900s, allegedly because they didn't fit the accepted narrative beliefs at the time. Now, to be fair, the Smithsonian has strongly denied these accusations. They've called them conspiracy theories, pointing out that newspapers back in the day regularly exaggerated or even outright fabricated stories to sell news. Sound familiar? But it's still weird. Where did all those giant bones reported by so many credible people wind up? I'll tell you where. Not the Smithsonian, according to them. Then you have the Serpent Mound area in Ohio. Famous for huge earthworks, built by ancient Native American cultures, right? In 1891, a respected archaeologist named Frederick Ward Putnam documented findings around Serpent Mound. He noted a skeleton measuring over 7 feet tall. Again, though well documented at the time, these bones simply vanished. Putnam was meticulous, careful. He was no sensationalist, but today his findings are downplayed or simply ignored entirely by mainstream archaeology. Why is that? And then there's Wisconsin, specifically Delavan Lake, 1912. This was reported widely at the time. Archaeologists from Beloit College excavated burial mounds and discovered skeletons they described as enormous, up to 9 feet tall. The New York Times even ran a headline, "Strange Skeletons Found." Yet no follow-up stories, studies, no peer-reviewed articles, no preserved remains, nothing. Today, historians often dismiss this as exaggerated reporting. Nothing to see here. Again, I have a question. Why did these exaggerations keep happening, everywhere, like all the time? Could this all be attributed to sensationalism, hoaxing, and a desire to sell papers? I guess. Newspapers in the 19th century were full of sensationalism, unlike today. But what about the scores of respected archaeologists and historians who reported these findings carefully, meticulously, only to have their discoveries vanish or get buried, pun intended, sometimes by institutional archives? Maybe a better explanation involves misunderstood fossil records, mammoths or giant sloths. Maybe they were mistaken for humans. Possibly. That actually happened quite a bit historically. Farmers would find bones and immediately call them giant humans because they simply didn't know any better. But in many of these cases, the accounts specifically mention distinctively human bones, skulls, arms, legs, no animal bones. Here's an unorthodox suggestion. Maybe long ago, there were genuinely larger human populations. We know gigantism happens genetically. Robert Wadlow, the tallest known human being ever, was almost 9 feet tall. Could isolated communities have produced groups of unusually large people? It's possible. But 12-foot tall skeletons? That's a tougher pill to swallow. More like swallowing a suppository. Ultimately, we're left with more questions than answers. Clearly, not every giant story can be true, but the sheer volume and consistency across cultures and continents, it keeps nagging at me. Why giants? Why everywhere? We recently put out a video on the Lovelock Cave giants. Check it out if you haven't already. The prospect of an ancient race of giants in America is definitely a hot-button issue for many, many people, though I can't for the life of me understand why. There's something uniquely human about this fascination. Maybe giants represent our fear of the unknown or our awe of nature's power. Or maybe, just maybe, beneath all that exaggeration and lost evidence, there's a kernel of truth waiting to be rediscovered. So, I'd love to get some feedback and get some of your thoughts on this. Is the prospect of giants in America a complete hogwash? Should people who suggest it as a possibility be shunned and maybe even mocked? If so, why? Also, to the extent that they ever existed, what do you think happened to these bones? Were the giants real, misunderstood fossils, or something else entirely? Reach out to me in the comments below, share your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious. Until then, I'm going to keep digging through these old newspapers and records, trying to make sense of it all. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe for more. I'm John Genoa, this is America's Strangest History, and thank you for watching.